Thank you, everyone, for joining us and for spending your lunch hour with us today for today's talk, Life on the Edge of the Mimbres Region, Powers Ranch as a Mimbres Site, with Doctors Patricia Gilman and Doctors Mary Whisenhunt. I'm Maggie Onosorgan, the Public Programs Manager here at the Ameren Museum, and as always, before we begin our program, we would like to acknowledge that the Ameren is located in southern Arizona, on lands where the Otham, Hopi, Zuni, and Yoemi and Apache families have lived for untold generations, and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We're very grateful for what all of these communities rich in history have to teach us. We would also like to thank our members and donors, as well as the Arizona Historical Society, who in part enable the Ameren to provide these free online programs and to fulfill Ameren's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist the Ameren in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit our website, ameren.org. We do have more talks in the works. I'm a little behind, so please watch our website for details that will be coming soon. And for those in the area, this weekend we'll be at the Tucson Festival of Books, booth 550, right by the big national parks tent. So come and say hello and pick up some free passes and see all our new archaeological books that we've put out in the recent years. We also have our big trail run and walk happening on Saturday, March 21st. There's still time to register. It's a really fun event and get you outdoors before the heat comes. It's all ages, so for more details, again, please visit our website. You can register directly off of www.ameren.org. The recording for today's program will be sent to everyone after later this afternoon, evening, for anyone to watch, available to watch on our YouTube channel, Ameren Foundation. And today, if you have any questions for Drs. Gilman or Whisenhunt, please type them in the Q&A chat box and we'll get to as many as possible. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Gilman and Dr. Whisenhunt with us today to talk about their recent research and book on this Mimbres site. Their book was published in August of 2025, titled Mimbres from the Heartland, published from the University of Arizona Press. Dr. Mary Whisenhunt received her doctorate in anthropology in 2020, conducting her fieldwork in Southeast Arizona. Her research is focused on the social resilience of pre-contact Indigenous people on the western boundary of the Mimbres region. Dr. Gilman has done archaeological research in the Mimbres region for more than 50 years, retiring from the Department of Anthropology at the University of Oklahoma. One of her research topics has been Mimbres beyond the Mimbres Valley. She is the author and co-author of multiple titles on the Mimbres, and I will include all those titles on the follow-up email for those of you who may want to read more on the subject. So we thank you both for sharing your knowledge, and I will turn it over to you to learn about this important site. Thank you.
I think I'm up first. This is Pat, but I don't see my picture here. Is that a problem?
Well, we see you, Pat.
Oh, okay. I see you now, Mary. Sorry. Okay, so Mary and I are going to talk about the research that we did that involves the Powers Ranch site, which you can see on the map here just west of the New Mexico-Arizona border. And you can see the Mimbres River there, kind of north of the word Mimbres. You can see it's a rather small river, and but it is the heartland of things Mimbres. If we go to the next slide, and you can see how far Powers Ranch is from it. This is the Mimbres River. The picture on the top is the Mimbres River. Even today, it flows year-round. And in the past, it, of course, would have flowed year-round. You see, even today, although this picture is from 50 years ago, there are very nice agricultural fields there in the valley. And the same would have been true in the past. This was a very rich area for people to live in, and people did live there. They lived there for thousands of years. And from about 1000 to 1130, they built above ground Pueblo room blocks of rooms that you see in the lower right here. This is the Maddox site that I worked on in the 1970s. And you can see the different rooms there. And what Mimbres is really known for is the beautiful black on white pottery. It's often geometric, but it about 30% of the time contains pictures of animals or people, and you can see a drawing of one of the pictures from one of the bowls here. A man and a woman. I might say they were the hero twins, but I might be wrong. Next slide, please. So there are thousands of those beautiful bowls. In contrast, we're going to contrast Powers Ranch site with that. And there are some similarities and there's some differences. And that's what makes it interesting. So at Powers Ranch itself, the archaeological site, it starts, people are there in the early pit structure period, perhaps from the AD, CE, 100s-ish, until the 700s. We don't know because we haven't excavated many of those structures and we don't have chronometric radiocarbon dates from them. But the site includes at least 12 of them, and we think a lot more. We think the later material covered them at the north end of the site. And we do have 2 radiocarbon dates, and you can see how early they are. They're 2,000 years ago. And then, unlike most Mimbres sites, in the Mimbres Valley and outside the Mimbres Valley, there is no one at this site for the several hundred years between 735-ish and 1000 AD. But at 1000 AD, we get the Mimbres Classic period for 100 plus years. At Powers Ranch, there are 2 small masonry room blocks. In total, there's 11 to 13-ish rooms. We don't know for sure, for reasons that I'll talk about in a second. Predominantly Mimbres Classic black on white pottery, that beautiful black on white pottery with the geometric, occasionally figurative designs. There's also a slab-lined hearth in one of the rooms, very typical of Mimbres and Classic at this point. There are some extramural work areas, that is, places where people did activities, their daily activities, outside of the rooms. And importantly, there are 2 human burials. And that's important because it suggests that people were here for some length of time. There's nothing after 1130. Although, as Mary will talk about, in other places in the valley, there's a lot after 1130. Okay, next slide. Okay, so our questions revolved around whether Powers Ranch was a Mimbres site. You know, it's so far from the Mimbres Valley that we might expect it to have a little bit of pottery from other people around that area. And it has very little pottery that's not Mimbres. Was it a field house or a habitation site? That is, did people go there in the summers to tend their agricultural fields, and they sort of lived in these structures that weren't very solid because it was the summertime and they weren't there year round? Or did they live there year round for a good length of time, a habitation site? Second question. If Powers Ranch was a Mimbres site, which we're going to make the case that it was it the same type of site that we see in the Mimbres Valley? And how is it similar and different? And you'll see how it's similar and different. Was Powers Ranch unique on this stretch of the Gila River? That was a question that was important to us given Mary's research. That is, was it just a family or 2 that moved out of the Mimbres Valley because they weren't getting along with people and they moved to the Gila River in the Classic period and it's a one-off, you know? Or were there people there through time? Yeah, and in the Mimbres Valley, and Mimbres people there through time. And what does the Powers Ranch tell us about what it was like to be Mimbres so far from the heartland of things Mimbres. Next slide. Okay, this is Mary.
Okay, over to me.
Over to you.
So there hasn't been a lot of previous research done in the York-Duncan Valley, that stretch of the Gila Valley that lies just south of Powers Ranch. It's one of the most essentially one of the most understudied areas archaeologically in the U.S. Southwest, and there are a number of reasons for that. So many of the sites have been destroyed by rail and road construction, by pot hunting most recently, agricultural land modification, canal construction. It's it's really hard to find intact Mimbres sites in that part of the world. There are a handful of cultural resource management reports, many of them written in the 1970s and 1980s. More recently, starting around 2014 and continuing until 2018, Bob Hard from the University of Texas at San Antonio and John Roney from Colinas Cultural Resource Management investigated several early agricultural sites, and that includes the Round Mountain site shown here on the left. These are Cerro de Trincheras sites. They're found in both early pit structure and in late archaic periods. But they're fascinating sites. They've got constructed terraces, rock rings that represent habitations, and constructed terraces. So they're in walls. So they're really amazing sites. As part of their investigations and my dissertation research, John Roney and I and our field school team surveyed much of the valley to scope out pre-contact settlement patterns and to see whether those patterns and the patterns of material culture cohered with those of the Mimbres Valley. Powers Ranch was not included in that survey since it lies about a couple of miles north of the northern extent of the survey area, but we did visit it with the support of Becky Powers. Community support was so incredibly important in this survey effort, especially that of farmers and ranchers. Many of the late archaic and early pit structure sites tend to be on federal and state land and therefore accessible to us. But almost all of the sites with Mimbres Classic components were on private land. So we needed to know people to get access, and we needed to work very closely with those folks. So after John and I had worked for several years, several field school years, we still didn't know a lot about Mimbres Classic sites. We just didn't find that many, and we knew that they had to be there. So we ended up reaching out to a couple of people who had excavated sites in search of pottery prior to 1990 when that was made illegal. And with that support, we were able to document 25 sites that were either located on private property or that were frankly no longer visible on the landscape. One former pot hunter took more than 300 photographs of pottery he'd excavated in the 1980s, and he had this phenomenal memory. He was able to recall virtually every detail about these pots, where he got them from. So he gave us a tremendous amount of detail. And so that allowed us to reconstruct the settlement patterns and chronology a lot more accurately. And we got a much better feel for the valley's ceramic type patterns as well. But one of the reasons that the Powers Ranch is so incredibly important in understanding the Mimbres Classic presence in the York-Duncan Valley is that it's the only classic habitation site that's been excavated. The Clark site, which lies just north of the town of Duncan, does have a classic component, but it's only a burial and a handful of Mimbres Classic sherds. So the people who excavated it, Lascaux and Montgomery, did that prior to 2013, and they suggested that the site might be a seasonal hamlet rather than a room block settlement. But they also noted that it's possible that classic features are present, maybe obscured by cliff features that were built on top of them. I think it's also possible that those features lie below the road, which is just to the west of the site. So there are a number of things that could, that there could be more Mimbres sites in the area, frankly. We simply don't know at this point. So, excavating Powers Ranch. The site was owned by Dr. and Mrs. Richard Powers. The Powers family had been approached numerous times by pot hunters seeking permission to dig the site, which, thank God, was refused. They'd taken some steps to protect the site, including signage, fencing, things like that. But pot hunters tend to find a way, unfortunately. Their daughter, Elizabeth, a former student in anthropology at the University of Arizona, encouraged the Powers to reach out to the Arizona State Museum. An archaeologist from ASM visited the site, evaluated it, and recorded it in 1981. Oop, one other comment on that. The Powers family then asked that professional archaeologists excavate the site. So U of A graduate student Chet Shaw and Mary Bernard Shaw, a research archaeologist at ASM, directed the investigations. And the data from that 2-month investigation underpins our research. The Powers family, including Elizabeth and Becky, continue to support research on the site. And they've allowed Pat and I to visit multiple times. So we're very, very grateful to them. Okay, so this is the overview of the site. On the left, you can see that this is actually on a terrace. It's a mesa about 40 feet high, rather unusual. We don't really see this in the rest of the valley. So this is in a much higher elevation than what we normally see. A little more isolated even sometimes, it feels like. But what you will notice is that there's no indications that road or rail construction have affected the site. This is very unusual. You normally tend to find, you know, a lot of disturbances by these kind of sites. And there's also been no indication of mechanical looting. We have seen indications of some looting just by hand in several places on the site. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this map because it's the only one that really shows the site in its entirety. As Pat mentioned earlier, there's 2 small Mimbres Classic room blocks up here in the north. It includes about 11 to 13 rooms, and all told for the entire site, about 12 pit structures from the early pit structure period. We think that there's probably more, but this is what we can see at this point. The Shaws excavated or tested 4 of those structures. PS4 at the south end, right down here, PS1, PS2, and an unnumbered pit structure at the intersection of trenches C and D. And Pat will tell you more about the northern portion of the site map in detail next, because that's where we see the Mimbres Classic component. In the south part of the site, we see 6 small circular depressions representing pit structures. The Shaws decided to place Trench A through one of those depressions. A gravel berm at the time surrounded it. The Shaws described that structure as shallow and noted several features, including 2 possible post holes and either a kind of hearth feature or a third post hole in the center of the floor of the structure. They did find some ceramics there, consisting of the plain types that you'd expect to find, but also some later types that suggest that this part of the site was used or visited by people in later periods. Over
So
to you, Pat.
this is a map of the north end of the site, and there are 2 room blocks represented on this map. At the north end, the top end, there's room block 1, which the Mary and Chet excavated, and it was pretty much untouched. There's a few potholes in it, but you can see there are 2 rooms. Those are Pueblo rooms, like you would see at Mesa Verde, for example. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. There's a couple of what they called extramural rooms, the tiny rooms to the southwest. There's an activity area to the northwest. There's another room over there to the northwest that they thought was a pit house, but it's not, I think. So that's room block 1, pretty small. If you look to the south, the bottom of the map, that is another room block, and that was pretty heavily pot hunted, although we found some intact deposits there, right where it's shaded. Um, and we don't know how far that room block goes. You see the dotted lines coming up. That room block could go up farther toward room block 1, but it does not connect to room block 1. So the architecture that Mary will talk about in a minute suggests that this is a Mimbres Classic site. The walls look like Mimbres. They're unshaped river cobbles. We used to call them ball bearings put together with a whole bunch of adobe. So it's not like what you see up north in Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde. Very Mimbres, very Mimbres. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is a close-up of room block 1 that Chet and Mary excavated along with their team, which sometimes often included members of the Powers family, by the way. Um, Over here on the left, you see a drone photograph by John Whisenhunt showing this room block, and you can see the rock outlines, I hope, there. And then you see the map of it here on the right, and you can better see the two rooms, the external rooms there, small rooms to the southwest, that activity area kind of shaded there to the northwest, and then that masonry lined so-called pit structure that's not a pit structure. Anyway, these are great members' rooms. Nobody would deny that. Keep going. Okay. One of the things that distinguishes any site in the Southwest from other sites is the kind of pottery on it. And on Mimbres sites in the Mimbres Valley, it's 99%, the painted pottery is 99% classic black on white pottery. The pottery I was describing earlier that has beautiful geometric designs or people and animals on it. In the Mimbres Valley, there's hardly any other kind of painted pottery. So we thought, looking at Powers Ranch, and it being kind of on the border of things Mimbres, that we might see a lot of other kinds of pottery on the site. So if you start at the top of this graph, you see plain pottery. That's what you see on every site in the Southwest, and you see a lot of it. And then you see corrugated pottery. You see a lot of it. That's pretty standard. This is Mimbres corrugated, pretty standard. But then when you get down to the painted types, Galliuro, Pinalina, Encinas, Hohokam, blah, 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 there's not very many. That Galliuro Pinalino would have come from directly to the southwest in the San Simon River drainage. There's hardly any of it. The Hohokam buff would have come from the Tucson Phoenix areas, perhaps. There's a little bit more of it. The ancestral Pueblo whitewares would have come from the north. Hardly any. You can barely see the little line there. But what you do see is a lot of classic black on white. And that's exactly what you would expect if it was a Mimbres site. That's exactly what you would see in the Mimbres Valley. And that's what we see here. Keep going. And this is what some of the pottery looks like. There weren't many whole vessels on the site. You see in the upper left, there's a complete jar. That was the only complete jar. And it was buried under the floor of one of those two rooms that I showed you. It was probably a jar for grain. And that's a very typical Mimbres jar from the time period. And it's pretty big. Then the two partial vessels on the right are Mimbres classic black on white bowls. The designs are not what you would see in the Mimbres Valley for various reasons that only us geeks care about. If you look down at the bottom right one, the left big chunk of pottery shows the interior of the vessel. The right side is the same part of the vessel, but it's flipped and you see the exterior. So it's painted both on the inside and the outside. Very unusual, very unusual. Weird stuff. The pot on the lower left is not Mimbres. And if you look at it, you can see it's got dots. Mimbres never has dots. For example, there's a number of other differences. It is the bottom half of a reserve black on white jar from the north. And what they did was they chipped off the top half. We don't know where that is. And the bottom half is what was left that they were using for something. I don't know what. And what you're looking at, because it's a jar, is you're looking at the exterior of it. And so that round blank space there is the bottom outside of the jar, if you can picture that. Okay, keep going. Okay, so were the people at Powers Ranch Mimbres? Let's look at the evidence. The vast majority of the painted pottery is Mimbres. That's one thing. We should note that at Powers Ranch and at all of the sites out there, except for some that Mary has, which I don't like to think about. They don't have the figurative designs. They don't have the animals and the people on them very often. Um, and the geometrics look like the geometrics farther east on the Gila River, an area we call the Western Mimbres, as opposed to the heartland Mimbres in the Mimbres Valley. Different designs. We did some neutron activation, which is a way of looking at the composition of the sherds, the clay composition of the sherds, and it suggests that most of the Powers Ranch painted pottery was made in this western Mimbres region and not in the Mimbres Valley. And that's important. So people were identifying with Mimbres. This is clearly a Mimbres site. It's got Mimbres black and white pottery. It's got nice Pueblo architecture. But they had a separate Western Mimbres identity from the Mimbres in the heartland. The pottery type suggests that people at Powers Ranch had relationships with people in other regions that reserve black on white half jar. It's the Hohokam buff pottery, but it's pretty small. It's pretty minor. Um, I think you're up next, Mary.
I am.
Yeah, okay.
So what does that evidence tell us about the function of Powers Ranch? Was this a habitation place where people lived year-round, or was it a temporary agricultural field house used seasonally, a place where people would come in the spring to plant their crops or to hunt and then return again in the late summer or early fall? Well, we have a number of measures that we can look at to help us determine this. The two room blocks at Powers Ranch only have a few rooms, but they're sturdily built, and we see quite a few floor and subfloor features. These factors suggest that significant labor investment in the room blocks occurred and that people built the facilities that they needed for long-term use. And as Pat mentioned, we also see burials, and that suggests at least somewhat a longer-term commitment to a place. The site has a large number of diverse types of artifacts as well, including ceramics, projectile points, and shell artifacts. There are a lot of ceramic sherds, more than 29,000 of them, and that's one of the strongest indicators that we have that Powers Ranch was a habitation site. And there were more than 160 projectile points as well, again suggesting that people lived there for quite a while. There were also some unusual flakestone or groundstone artifacts, some of which are shown here on the right. Let me just kind of go through these. So the one on the left is a groundstone. It's a conical point tip. The next one is a greenstone pendant, a slate pendant, and a fragment of a vesicular basalt pipe. You can see the projectile points. They're dominated by obsidian in the projectile point assemblage. There are more than 45 specimens of shell, including 7 types of marine shell and 1 freshwater type. The number of specimens and the diversity of type are a lot for a small site with limited excavation. And we wouldn't really expect that kind of number and variety of shell at a non-residential site in this area. You can see some examples of those shell artifacts right here. Most of the specimens were fragments of ornaments, including bracelets and pendants and beads. They probably traded for them for the ornaments with the Hohokam because the investigators didn't uncover any evidence of people trying to manufacture them from marine shell. But they did find some evidence showing that people were trying to manufacture ornaments from local freshwater mollusks. And those mollusks were present there until probably the late 18th and 19th century, when land modification destroyed the habitat. Powers Ranch has almost 4,700 faunal specimens as well. That's one of the largest early pit structure and Mimbres Classic period assemblages in the western Mimbres region. Lagomorphs, including cottontails and hares, comprised about 70% of the assemblage, and that was followed by artiodactyls, i.e. deer, about 16%. Several unusual specimens were also noted, and they're listed here on the slide. The presence of duck and beaver, cormorant, and raccoon are explained by the site's proximity to the Gila River. So while we can't be 100% sure that people lived at Powers Ranch year-round, the evidence definitely suggests that the site was inhabited by a household or two for some years. It wasn't temporary, It wasn't a non-habitation activity site, and the architecture and ceramics in particular suggest that they were affiliated with the Mimbres tradition, as Pat mentioned. So let's look at the Powers Ranch in context. Was it unique? Well, these are the 83 pre-contact sites that we surveyed or revisited during our survey work from 2014 to 2018. Temporally, the sites range from late Archaic to Salado sites from the late Post-Classic, so from about 800 BC to about 1450 AD. Of these 83 sites, only 12 are Mimbres Classic. I'm sorry, 18 are Mimbres Classic. 12 of them have structural features that were identified either through survey or that were described to us by credible informants as having architecture. On the right, you can see the 18 sites and their relative sizes. As Pat mentioned, these aren't the big sites that you see in the Mimbres Valley or even in the Gila Valley in New Mexico, where most of the classic sites in the York-Duncan Valley have from 9 to 12 rooms, not the 100, 200, 300 room blocks that we see further east. We don't know how many room blocks were present in the York-Duncan Valley Mimbres Classic sites because no excavation of habitation classic sites has actually occurred. But based on the number of rooms we estimate per site, we're probably looking at 1 or 2 room blocks. The striking thing about the classic presence on the Gila is that we see very similar architectural and material cultural patterns to those of the Mimbres Valley, but they occur at a much smaller scale than those large aggregated room sites in the Mimbres Valley or the Gila Valley in New Mexico. So let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So comparing the number of rooms from Mimbres Valley, Red Rock Valley, and York-Duncan Valley. The Mimbres Valley has almost 2,500 rooms compared with the Red Rock Valley's 926 rooms. The York-Duncan Valley comes in at a very distant third with under 100 rooms. So if you want to use room counts as a proxy for population shifts through time, the York-Duncan Valley's population is highest during the late Post-Classic, where we see around 500 cliff phase rooms. Sherd counts that we obtained through survey and photos of those whole pots that were excavated in the 1980s really helped us determine site chronologies as well as non-local social relationships through time. And they helped us determine whether or the degree to which people in the Classic period considered themselves Mimbres. Like Powers Ranch, the Classic period painted wares in the Gila Valley were pretty homogeneous, mostly Mimbres Classic black on white. But there were a few exceptions to this. If you look at the pottery photos, more than 250 photographs of pots were associated with the Tyler site. So we've really got the most in-depth look at pottery chronology at that particular site. Almost 100 of those 250 pots were Mimbres painted ware and utility ware. But there were also some non-local types found there, including 5 Hohokam buffware pots. 3 of those pots were produced between the year AD 1000 and 1130 in the Mimbres Classic period. There were also 3 San Simon pots and several vessels from the reserve area from the same time frame. So the people in Arizona's Gila Valley clearly had some level of social relationships with people in the Phoenix Basin and the San Simon Valley to the west and to the reserve area to the north. And of course, as Pat mentioned, the photos also allow us to compare distributions of various designs on the pottery, particularly since not a single sherd we recorded in the valley showed a representational motif. Pat wrote a great book in 2018 about social identity in the Mimbres Edge regions. She asked whether the people in the Edge regions considered themselves Mimbres. Did they share a similar identity? And to do that, she compared material culture attributes, including pottery designs, architecture, and religious participation in the Mimbres, Gila, and San Simon drainages. So if you look at that, we consider the percentage of Mimbres black on white ceramics to be a measure of Mimbres identity, and the distributions between drainages are pretty comparable. Looking at architecture, the Mimbres and Gila valleys all have room blocks, but they're nearly absent from the San Simon Valley to the west. The number of room blocks per site is very different between drainages. We see a significant number of room blocks in the Mimbres Valley with many, many rooms, and even more room blocks, but with slightly fewer rooms in New Mexico's Gila Valley. Neither Arizona's Gila Valley nor the San Simon Valley have similar distributions, much, much smaller. But we really see the most distinct differences between the Mimbres Valley and the peripheral areas in the ritual participation measures. There are some distinct differences in pottery designs. In the Mimbres Valley, about a third of the sherds, as Pat mentioned, have animal or human representational designs, and the proportion is much lower in both parts of the Gila Valley and virtually absent in the San Simon Valley. And there's a near total absence of hero twins motifs and scarlet macaws in the other drainages. So this suggests that the people who lived in the Gila Valley and the San Simon region did not participate in classic period ritual activities the same way as those who lived in the Mimbres Valley. And the slide also shows us that settlements in Arizona's Gila Valley, including Powers Ranch, appear most akin to groups in New Mexico's Gila Valley. So to top this off, Powers Ranch is without it. It's a member site. We can't really say anything different. We see similar pottery type sequences, distributions of painted pottery, and architecture that make it culturally Mimbres. The substantial architecture at Powers Ranch and the large ceramic, lithic, faunal, and shell assemblages support the notion that the site was used for relatively long-term habitation, probably by one or two households. And the site's not unique. We see similar classic occupations down the Gila River, same size, same ceramic types. Maybe the biggest difference between Powers Ranch and the settlement pattern south of the site is that at Powers Ranch, there's a break in continuity between the early pit structure and the Mimbres Classic period occupations. Almost all of the classic sites in the York-Duncan Valley have a late pit structure component. And of course, we mentioned too that most of those sites in the York-Duncan Valley are at much lower elevations. They're all on low terraces. We have one in the floodplain and one a bit higher up, but all told, it's very much a low terrace sort of occupational pattern. Based on the architecture, the pottery types, and of course the carbon dates, we know that people lived here for a long time, likely beginning in the AD 100s. And distributions of black on white sherds, architecture, measures of ritual expression suggest that the people who lived at the Powers Ranch site and in the York-Duncan Valley are most closely affiliated with the Western Mimbres region, with connections to the Mimbres heartland, but with their own long-term stable identity.
So why is Powers Ranch and the survey research that Mary has done important? We think that it's important to look at the small sites and to look at sites outside the Mimbres Valley, outside the heartland, to understand what it was like to be Mimbres in this time period. So one of the things that we now know is that Mimbres is not all figurative bowls and big pueblos, like the textbooks and a lot of the previous site reports would have you believe. There are different ways of being Mimbres, and the Powers Ranch site demonstrates that. So I think an important takeaway here is that small sites that are far from the Mimbres Valley are not pale reflections of Mimbres culture. I heard an archaeologist say once that they're just hicks out there. You know, they don't know how to be Mimbres, and so they do the best they can, but they're not really fully Mimbres. Well, the people at these sites had their own version of Mimbres culture. They weren't hicks. They produced culture. They produced their own identity. They didn't just blindly follow what others were doing. For example, if you think about why people outside the Mimbres Valley didn't have figurative vessels very much, didn't have macaws, didn't have hero twins iconography on their pots, on their figurative pots. It could be because they weren't allowed to do that. If you didn't live in the valley, you couldn't, and you weren't related to certain families, you couldn't reproduce that kind of image. But it also could be that they chose not to, that they said, we're Mimbres, but we don't like that stuff they're doing in the classic now period in the Mimbres Valley. We don't agree with that version of religion and ritual and cosmology. And so we're going to do our own here while remaining Mimbres. We have connections to those folks in the Mimbres Valley, but we're not going to do exactly what they're doing. We don't know which scenario is correct, of course. But people were living in this area, in the area of Powers Ranch, along the Arizona part of the Gila River, near the boundary with New Mexico, for centuries. Potentially the same families, maybe not, but probably some of the same families, and they produced a version of culture. They produced their identity, who they were, without a lot of outside influence from the heartland. They didn't just mimic the heartland. So that's that's why these sites are important because they give us a different perspective on members. And finally, Maggie mentioned our book, and there it is. Um, it's very technical. It's got a lot of data in it because we're writing for archaeologists 50 or 100 years from now and other people who are interested in this kind of stuff. Um, and as Mary mentioned, we would not have been able to do this without the Powers family supporting the requesting the excavation and then supporting the excavation and supporting our more recent research into the materials of Powers Ranch and um, and at the site itself. And I think Liz Powers may be on this Zoom call and maybe Becky as well. And so that's pretty cool. Uh, so we're done.
Great. We're going to open it up to questions. We've got a few. Let me check in. Um, one from Margalith. That
Ah,
one marine,
Margaret.
the one marine shell far left lower looks like a big horn sheep or question mark.
Ooh, I don't know.
Wow.
I
I
don't
think
know.
it was, I can bring that back up. Let me take a look at that.
There are a couple of shell bracelets that have been modified, broken, and then modified into fangs. Um, that that are kind of cool and that would have been necklaces at that point. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, Margaret, that could be a feathered serpent. No, it's not.
Interesting.
The one in the
Okay, we've got,
lower left, I think.
oh,
I think it's just badly worn and kind of crumbly, but I don't remember. I'd have to look at the actual artifact again. But you can see the kind of fang-like thing on the upper right too. A lot of the shell has been reworked. The one second from the left on the lower row is also a piece of reworked shell. Actually, except for the two pendants,
Yeah, I
it's all
think
reworked. Yeah.
you're talking about this one, right? Yeah, I think this is the shirt of Glycymeris. This is a
Yeah.
reworked.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
a
a
reworked one.
bracelet and now it's a pendant.
Now it's a necklace. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pendant. Yeah. Yeah.
so we've got one from Arthur. Were you able to source the obsidian present in the assemblage?
Yes.
Yes. It's all from, I'm not
Mule Creek,
remembering,
Mule
Mule
Creek or
Creek.
Cow Canyon.
Or Cow Canyon,
Yeah,
yep.
both
Which
those.
are the two closest sources. And so that's exactly what you would expect. And we imagine that we think that there are obsidian Apache tears, nodules, the raw material, in the Gila River gravels right below the site. So we're picturing people walking down to the Gila, finding some nodules, and chipping them into projectile points and whatnot.
Yeah. And we sourced some of the obsidian that was recovered from the excavations further south of there, and it's exactly the same thing.
Hmm. Yeah.
We have another one from Margoliouth. Did research or work with the locals indicate that the ceramics were associated with burials? Were there kill holes?
There were some kill holes, Margaret. But yes, and most of them were in fact associated with burials. What was kind of interesting is that there was also an unusual kind of, I wouldn't call it a kill hole, but there were on a few vessels there were chips in cardinal directions on the rim of the vessel. There's been some recent research on that, but but we probably have three or four that show that kind of marking rather than an actual hole in the body of the ceramic.
So if it was a religious kind of new faction, can you guys tell if there was um, still going back and forth between the sites of the people, or you can't tell that?
Between the people in the Mimbres Valley and
Yeah, if it was a religious separation, would it have
um,
been?
in the Mimbres Valley, most of the burial vessels are killed by chipping a hole in the bottom of the bowl. And sometimes you find the sherd from the hole there. Um, I don't know the percentage of kill holes on the Mimbres vessels that marry, and I don't know that anybody calculated those. But that would be something that would be a similarity, a sort of broad Mimbres identity, that's what you always do if you're Mimbres, um, and not something that distinguishes you within Mimbres.
We have some kill holes, but unfortunately, because these are photographs, they often don't photograph the bottom of the vessel. So it was really difficult. I actually did try to
Yeah.
look at that as best I could, but yeah, I couldn't get a really solid answer because they're just photographs.
Yeah.
So one from Julie, was there cultural influence from Hohokam?
Um, yes and no. There are. There's a little bit of Hohokam pottery, as Mary mentioned, and as you saw on the graph of the pottery from Powers Ranch. And as I remember it, the neutron activation compositional analysis suggested that a couple of the sherds, anyway, this is only a couple sherds out of 29,000, were from the Phoenix Basin. Um, there's a lot of Mimbres archaeologists who think that there's a lot of Hohokam influence before the classic period, sort of from 750, 800 to 1000 AD. Um, and they see it in the designs on the earlier pottery. Um, we'll leave it at that. I see what they're talking about. I don't buy it. We just don't have a lot of. I would expect to see a lot more Hohokam pottery in the member sites if there was a lot of influence. I think people move back and forth, but I don't think that people from the Hohokam area came to members and members people went, "Ah, gosh, we should do what they're doing." I think they were visiting and making marriage ties and friendship ties and those sorts of things. I don't know, but
There are a couple of sites in the York Duncan Valley that do have, I would call a significant Hohokam presence. One of them is a jewelry, an area where they very clearly were making jewelry out of shell. But it's more than likely that that was a late pit house
oh,
uh,
uh-huh.
part of the site. I mean, the people were present there, we think, from at least the early pit structure to the late post-classic period. And it was unclear because of the amount of pot hunting that had gone on. There's no stratigraphy. So really all we've got are stories from the guys who pot hunted it and and pictures of some of the artifacts and the pottery. But what we do know is that there was an area on the site where they found a lot of jewelry making, um, pieces of jewelry, things like that. And they called it Bead Hill because they found beads there. And there's another site that where the person who excavated it prior to 1990 said that there were Hohokam burials.
Mm.
So there was a presence there, but as
Mhm.
Pat said, it was probably pretty minimal. Family visits, trade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One from Henry, was there any signs of conflict between regions over time?
No. No, and in fact, Katie Bastian has done research on um, evidence of violence on human bones in the Mimbres area, in the Mimbres Valley, not in the outer areas. Um, and there's very little violence. If you go to strike somebody, they put their arm up, and you'll see fractures along their arm, for example. And that's the sort of thing she was looking for. And compared to the rest of the Southwest, there's very little evidence of violence in the Mimbres area. Things were good there for 100 years, really good. And before that, there were big chunks of time where there was enough rainfall, but not too much. The crops were good. Life was good. So maybe they didn't need so much violence.
One from Jan, have you identified a common theme on the Powers Ranch property?
A common,
Theme? I'm, I'm assuming pottery theme?
oh, oh,
I
maybe
could be wrong.
at the site. Um,
On the Powers Ranch property, a
yeah.
common theme. Yeah.
If Jan, you're talking about whether the images on the pottery are similar, we don't see that at member sites ever. We thought we would. When we started research in the 1970s in the Mimbres Valley, we thought that different sites would have different themes, that you would see horned toads painted on the pottery on this site and deer painted on the pottery on this site, predominantly. Nope,
Yeah.
doesn't work at all. Every site has the same variety of pictures on the pottery that every other site has. At Powers Ranch, there are very few sherds with figuratives. I think there's 20 sherds out of 29,000 that had any sort of a picture on them that you could see. Of course, the sherds are pretty small. Um, and and so it wouldn't be possible to tell.
Yeah. Another one from Henry, are the shells or any other artifacts from the Gulf of California?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the glycemeris are definitely from the Gulf of California, or so we think. But again, they would have arrived there through trade with the Hohokam, we think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is that a major trade route when you think of where the location was?
Along the
Between,
Gila River, perhaps,
yeah.
knowing where it flows through Arizona. You go up the Gila, um, and then across, and it would have been a major way that people would have moved across the landscape, I think. Um,
One from Libby. Would that bowl with the undecorated bottom have been too early to reflect the Salado perforated plate?
yes, that was originally a jar, reserve jar, probably. I can't 15 centimeters high, and they cut it in half. And what you saw was a bowl that was the bottom half of the jar. And it's reserved black on white, and it's contemporary with Mimbres Classic black on white, 1,000 to 1130, 1150-ish. So
And
yes,
one from
before
Elise.
Salado.
Yeah, we did
Ah,
find a number of those of the type of perforated plate you're talking about
yes.
in the York Duncan Valley, post AD 1300. So those we found those evidence of that in two or three sites.
One from Elisa. Are there 45 species of shell? Just
Oh, no, no.
Peleosopods.
No, I'm sorry. 45, there were 45 samples basically, and
Okay.
seven different types of marine shell, one type of domestic or of local.
Yeah. Which as Mary said, for a small site is a lot of different kinds of shell and a lot of different forms of shell that that the pieces were made into. Lots of different kinds of shapes and purposes.
Another one from Arthur. The shell on the lower left is a bracelet fragment that incorporates the umbo, which has been lightly outlined.
Yeah. If
Mhm.
that's
Statement.
Arthur Vokes, then he
Yep.
Yeah.
did the shell analysis. Yeah. So,
Okay.
Marglyph, it's not a bighorn sheep.
Do you have additional context information for some of the less common faunal remains? Any location or depositional information that is helpful? From
I don't
Katie.
remember. I'd have to look at that. Um, I don't think so. There aren't many, there aren't many contexts on the site. And there's certainly no ritual context that we could identify that stood out from ordinary habitation sorts of things. But the fact that there were so many different kinds of animals, and they're only represented by one or two bones, um, you don't see that on big classic sites in the Mimbres Valley. You don't see that variety of animal bones um, in the Mimbres Valley. And so, again, it makes Powers Ranch stand as something different, um, which again goes to the point of these small sites are important because they show us different aspects of life in the Mimbres area that we wouldn't know because you would expect there to be rabbits. Um, Deer, maybe the occasional antelope, and a couple of other things, random things there at Powers Ranch. And that's not what we have at all. So,
So is this the farthest northern site for Mimbres, this area?
no.
No?
No. There are member sites up on the San Francisco River in New Mexico, up as far as the town of Alma, if people know where that is. On the San Francisco. It's near the border. The WS Ranch site is a combination of a member site and a reserve phase site, I think, in my reading of it. And it is, I don't have a map, but it's north of Powers Ranch and the York Duncan Valley.
But I think it's the
And it
further
has
north on the Gila River, right, Pat? I mean, have you seen anything north of that on the Gila?
No.
Okay.
has LiDAR been helpful to used on these sites in this area or?
Oh, I wish we could have used LiDAR. We simply couldn't afford it. But
Oh,
honestly, there's so little foliage up there that you don't have to use a like a foliage penetrating radar to survey or to identify things. Honestly, a couple of the Sierra de Trinchera sites that were found, John Roney found those by looking at Google Earth.
Yeah.
oh wow.
It's pretty amazing. So no, we have not.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we haven't had an opportunity to try that. We did some IR imagery using drones before, but we couldn't really nothing really popped out.
Yeah. And the last two questions are similar. What about petroglyph evidence and rock art at Powers Ranch?
There's none at Powers Ranch directly. Mary may have come across some in survey.
We did, yeah. There was one site, probably early pit structure, late pit structure, but they were just lines that were carved into the rock. I wouldn't even call them petroglyphs necessarily. I'm not sure what I would call them, but that there was one late pit structure site that did have that. The only one that I'm aware of.
That's it then. I want to thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge. Now I need to go out and read the book, but it's probably too technical for me.
No,
Read the first and the
So
last chapters.
yeah, thank you very much
you
for
have to
sharing
read
your
chapter
time.
two too. Come
Oh,
on.
okay. And chapter two.
Yeah, so thank you again for sharing your time, and I'll turn it over to you two for your last words. Thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, Go ahead, Pat. You can go first.
So we hope that what we have um, done today is given you an appreciation for some underappreciated archaeological sites out there on the landscape, and for going back to material that was excavated 50 years ago, but was unfortunately never written up, and working on it again, luckily with different eyes. Luckily, in that we have different ways of thinking about things now. We've added a lot of knowledge in the last 50 years. So hopefully it's useful out there.
Yeah, thank you guys for showing up and Maggie for inviting us to give this presentation. Did want to just emphasize again how important community support and involvement in these things is for us, just in access and trying to help people understand why these sites are important to protect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you for anybody out there who's doing that right now. We appreciate it more than we can say.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye everybody. Thank you.